Do you think that some NHL teams strategically lose games to secure better draft picks? It's a controversial topic that sparks heated debates amongst fans and experts alike. And if it is happening, is it fair play? Or is it tarnishing the integrity of the sport? In the high-stakes world of pro hockey, securing top draft picks can make or break a team's future success. But how far are teams willing to go to ensure they get the best players? That's the question at the heart of today's discussion. I hope you'll join us in the comments. And hey, if you like watching sports and talking sports, and you're interested in making a little money online, you're going to want to be subscribed to the channel. So the big question is, why would NHL teams intentionally lose games? And the answer lies in the league's draft system and the incredible allure of securing top talent. It seems like we have this discussion every year as it becomes more and more clear which teams are headed for the playoffs and which teams are not. But the topic really catches fire in draft years where the prize potentially is the next big game changer for the league. There are a few cases of this in history, but let's take a look at some of the current top players in the game. In 2000-2001, the Pittsburgh Penguins lost to the New Jersey Devils in the conference finals after 11 straight years of making the playoffs. And after that, they fell off a cliff. They were terrible for the next 4 seasons. That helped the Pittsburgh Penguins get a few lottery picks in the draft, and it turned out pretty good. They picked up Evgeny Malkin, who's still playing today, and somebody else you might have heard of, Sidney Crosby. Sid the Kid, as he was called at the time, was touted as the next big thing to happen to hockey, and just look at the record books now. The evidence is there. During Crosby's career, the Pittsburgh Penguins won the Stanley Cup in 2009, 2016, and 2017. And who knows if he's done. So you could look at the Pittsburgh Penguins as an example of tanking actually working. But did they do it on purpose? That's the question. And as far as their on-ice play goes, there really isn't a lot of evidence to support that. They had a bad team. Bad teams play bad hockey. What happens in GM offices, though, might be a different story. Fast forward to the 2015 draft, where arguably the best player in the world now, Connor McDavid, was up for grabs. The Edmonton Oilers at the time were horrible, and Oiler fans were actually encouraging tanking to try to get a shot at Connor McDavid. Terms like McTanking or dishonor for Connor were all over social media at the time. But by then the NHL had changed the draft rules. It was much more difficult to intentionally tank to try to get a high draft pick. And the Oilers actually didn't have the best chance. It was Buffalo at that time. Arizona was also in the mix, and the GMs of both of those teams were very clearly gutting the cores of those teams. Buffalo got rid of guys like Tyler Myers and Drew Stafford, and they got almost nothing in return. They did end up with Evander Kane, but that was a tough time for him. He was out for the rest of that season. Arizona unloaded really good players like Keith Yandle and Antoine Vermette. Now, why would already bad teams want to make themselves even worse? Well, of course they wanted to improve their odds of winning the draft lottery. Anybody who was paying attention knew exactly what was going on. But that may have been an example of the NHL's new anti-tanking mathematical system actually working. Last place in the NHL was no longer any guarantee, and the Edmonton Oilers only had an 11.5% chance of getting the number 1 overall pick. And as we all know, it truly was a lottery win for them. So maybe the Edmonton Oilers weren't intentionally tanking that year, they were just that bad, but the strategy of tanking was still quite apparent around the league. Now, since that McDavid draft year in 2015, some things have changed again. Of course, we've got a couple of expansion teams in Vegas and Seattle, and there are probably more to come, but in the meantime, the mathematics for the draft are a little bit different. Is that enough to change tanking habits? Well, of course, this topic came up again in 2023 when the prize was young superstar Connor Bedard. Well, we still have a situation where the team with the worst record has the best odds of winning the draft lottery. And interestingly, if you remember at the end of the 2023 season, there were a number of the bottom feeders who were all almost jockeying for position within a few points of each other. The San Jose Sharks, the Arizona Coyotes, the Anaheim Ducks, the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Columbus Blue Jackets. It really looked like a race to the bottom. So reporters asked Commissioner Gary Bettman.
Nobody tanks because we have a weighted lottery. And you're not going to lose games to increase your odds by a couple of percentage points. That's silly. And frankly, suggesting tanking, I believe, is inconsistent with the professionalism that our players and our coaches have. Nobody tanks. Our players and our coaches do their best to win.
Well, I guess we're done here. The commissioner himself says it's not happening. So when the trade deadline came around and the Chicago Blackhawks got rid of Sam Lafferty, Jake McCabe, Max Domi, and their franchise guy Patrick Kane, clearly there must have been some other strategy in mind. Well, as it turned out, the Anaheim Ducks won that race to the bottom, and they had a 25.5% chance of winning the draft lottery. Second from the bottom were the Columbus Blue Jackets. They had a 13.5% chance of winning the draft lottery. Chicago finished third from the bottom, and they only had an 11.5% chance of winning the lottery. Fortunately for them, just like with Connor McDavid and the Oilers, they got a little lucky. And they won. So we're in a place where luck plays a role, but teams still have a lot of control over how they can improve their odds. As it stands right now, essentially the worst 11 teams have a chance to win the number 1 draft pick. Other teams that don't make the playoffs do have a chance to win, but in the lottery they cannot advance more than 10 spots. So if they are the 12th worst team, they can only potentially advance to the number 2 draft pick spot. And for those really bad teams that put together a streak of losing seasons, well, now you can only win the lottery twice in any given 5-year period. Could it be done any differently? There are a couple of radical suggestions I've seen over the years. One is to eliminate the draft altogether. How would that work? Well, teams would just have an opportunity to pursue a certain number of players each year who have never signed an NHL contract. It might be similar to the process American colleges use to recruit student athletes. Teams could decide who they want to pursue, and players could decide where they want to play. Of course, there's an inherent problem with that because, as we've seen, there are players that do not want to play in certain markets for various reasons. You can't help but wonder, would Connor McDavid be playing for the Edmonton Oilers if, say, the Florida Panthers had a big offer for him instead? Lifestyle choices are already influencing free agency and no trade clauses, so certain teams would be at a disadvantage. The other thought I've seen tossed around is to actually have a playoff for draft order. So you've got 16 teams that make the Stanley Cup playoffs. You've got 16 teams that do not make the playoffs. If those 16 teams that don't make it have to get through a playoff round to determine their draft position, wouldn't that be incredible incentive to not gut your team and not tank? Teams get a few more games to sell tickets to, they make a little more money, but then the downside to that would be there's already hockey until June. Where are we going to fit more games into the schedule? What are your thoughts on this? Let's have a discussion in the comments. How should the NHL address tanking teams? Are there not some serious ethical questions here about the values and principles of sport? Or is it just business? And speaking of the business of hockey, you might be interested in joining in this discussion. All the best.